Hello, everybody, and thanks so much for watching this episode here at Your Revolution Los Angeles. I have a fantastic interview with someone that I'm actually a fan of here, Scott Santens. He's a board of fun for humanity, editor of basicincometoday.com, columnist, he does have columns there at the HuffPost, successful YouTube creator at Scott Santens' channel, where basically people can learn more about the idea of universal basic income. Scott, how you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good, thank you. Really happy to have you on. After hearing you at the People's Convention, that was a great speech. All the stuff that you brought up, spot on.
Thanks.
And so I have tons of questions. I've read your articles, so I just kind of want to jump right into it. Now, First off, when I started hearing about UBI, I thought, well, that sounds like a great idea. Of course I'd want the money. And I think a lot of people come from that. And then when somebody challenges someone that doesn't have much info, then it's easy for it to fall apart really quick. So somebody says, oh yeah, free money, that's all you want, like how? So there's a lot of stuff that you said, and I kind of want to clear that up and be able to arm people with the right info, let's say. So first off, let me just kind of start off by saying that I've got a couple of quotes from you, just things that you've said that impressed me. Like, first off, when you're like, hey, look, we're not talking about not left, not right, but forward. I think that's amazing. You're saying, like, duopoly is not a democracy, right? And so you have some fantastic ideas. So just to start then, for those that may not know, what is UBI and what's your stance on it?
Yeah, I would describe UBI as being society investing in all of its members individually with an amount of money that is fully unconditional and regularly provided for life. So this really is, and should be seen as an investment, should be seen as a dividend. And, there are no work requirements. It goes to everyone, whether they are working or not working. It doesn't, define work in any way. So it goes to unpaid workers and paid workers. And, this is I would consider it to be a human right too. And as I said in my speech, this is when we're talking about, we talk about the human right to live. And at the same time, we have the system where we are withholding what people need to live on the conditions that they do certain things and either, work for certain employers or jump through hoops for government assistance and these kinds of things. And this is about saying that life should be unconditional. And saying that life should be unconditional is not a left or a right thing.
Right. Okay, completely makes sense. So then, I guess I should say then why UBI specifically for that, to answer that question or that problem,
Yeah, so I guess, people can say, oh, well, if we're going to say grant unconditional access to resources, then instead of cash, then couldn't we also do, say, universal services and, make sure people have food, make people, sure people have housing and clothing and all these other things. And I get that. But at the same time, realistically speaking, you can't provide that in a way that's fully universal and unconditional to everyone in the most efficient way. Like take food, for example. Like it works very efficiently for money to actually obtain food. We go to our store, we purchase what we want, what we decide we want, based on this amount of money that we have that we can make those decisions. And if you try to meet that some other way, we'd have to build up some other network of government food centers or something, and then that would be limited to whatever the food options are there. And, you can imagine people deciding, oh, well, that food is unhealthy, so let's not put that in there. This food is healthy, so let's put that in there. And you can that you'd have corporations going, paying lobbyists and saying like, well, this food is actually should be considered good food and this shouldn't be considered, good food. So you get into all that and it's just like a mess. And the thing about money is that it is choice to decide for ourselves what it is that we figure is most important for us. Like housing is another good example too. Like we want to make sure that housing is a right and people can actually obtain that housing. And when it comes to, let's say, housing projects, housing, buildings, those are usually like in specific areas of the city. And is that something that we want? Like we ourselves usually prefer that we get to choose where it is that we want to live. And even when it comes to housing vouchers, we don't get to use those anywhere. It's up to the landlords to determine if they're going to accept those or not. So the only thing that really works well to make sure anyone can live anywhere is cash. And also, of course, there's people who, let's say, would prefer to not live like in a house. Maybe they would prefer to actually travel all around everywhere all the time. That's okay to actually enable that choice too. So that's what it's really about, is enabling all the creativity and all the ways that people would want to live. Cash does that in a really effective, efficient way.
That makes a lot of sense. And so if we were to say, the pursuit of freedom, then that's one way to do it. So I've seen many, like I said, a couple of articles of yours that will lay it down, the mathematics. And I can imagine a lot of people's brains getting twisted while they're trying to figure all that out. So I guess then for something like that to happen at a time when we could hardly get any progressive policies done or anything for the people. It seems like right now our government's completely captured by large multinational corporations, and people tend to vote against their own interests. So I'm just kind of curious, how do we make that happen? What's the process for overhauling the system to make this happen?
Yeah, I mean, that's always the $1 million question, isn't it? Is how to actually make government work for us. And so, when it comes to basic income, when it comes to cash, that is something we've even seen in this crisis, where right when it happened, there was a very quick agreement on let's get a stimulus payment out. And the debate was really how much should the stimulus payment be, who should it cover, what that amount should be, like for dependents and children or whatever. And that worked great. People, got that check, and certainly some people didn't get it that should have gotten it. But for the most part, people agreed that that's the thing to do. And even right now, there's still agreement there, as in, let's actually do a second stimulus check. And then both sides are disagreeing on what else should be done besides that stimulus check. But there's again that agreement that that second stimulus check is needed. So it's interesting to see that there, out of all the things that we disagree on both sides, that there does seem to be that mutual agreement on let's just make sure people have money. And so that I think that's a very positive outcome of this, that we do seem to recognize that together. But yeah, the trick is how to actually make that happen in a recurring, permanent way. And I think a lot of that depends on what happens, during this crisis, what happens at the election, what happens after the election, what happens next year. And, potentially if we're looking at an economy that is in serious need of demand, with, lots of people being unemployed, after there's perhaps another round of layoffs and mass unemployment, and also the eviction crisis that can happen once, we end the ability for people to not evict people. How many people right now are behind on their rents? How many people are behind on their mortgages and everything? It could be a real mess that we're looking at. So I think that mess opens up the opportunity to actually do this in a way that both sides can agree on.
Right. So almost in a way, this now can be a blessing in disguise, although, not at all intentional or whatever.
Yeah, it should never have needed this. And I also like to remind people too, that imagine if we'd already had it, if we already had that floor when this all happened, how different would things be right now? It would just be incredibly different. Yeah.
Gosh, I do wish that we had that. So then it sounds to me that the messaging needs to work properly, right? And I'm wondering then, have you put any thought into that? I know it's not like you're a political strategist, but I think that, you have a lot, you have a full idea, of what this is and how it would work. So what would probably be the right messaging for politicians, that are looking to get elected? or just let's say like even in the media or whatever?
Yeah. So when it gets really interesting when it comes to strategy as to, what would work best. And of course, I'm thinking about that all the time, what could work best. And I don't know the
Mm,
answers to that, but we can try to figure them out.
yeah.
I think that it's important that, say, each representative is contacted, especially by their constituents, but people with influence in their constituencies, and they're spoken to in ways that they can see the value in this idea, um, from their particular perspectives and what's important to them. So let's
Hmm.
say, representative is very influenced by, unions and union leaders or something. And in that case, I think that representative should be informed about basic income as bargaining power, because I think that is one of the key ingredients of it. Is that people think that this is just money, but the most important element of basic income is the fact that it is unconditional. So if you do receive an amount of money that is unconditional, then you can actually say no to employers. And that really is what strike power is. A strike is when you have the collective agreement that people are saying, all right, we're going to withhold our labor until our
Hmm.
demands are met. And the trickiness of that situation too is you have to have a large enough strike fund that can enable you to strike long enough to actually get what the demands that you are demanding. Basic income says, okay, every person as an individual can withhold their labor until their individual demands are met. So let's say,
Hmm.
I'm not going to work for an employer for $8 an hour, but I will work for
Right.
$15 an hour.
Hmm.
And aside from that, what happens is now you have that greater collective power as well. So now a union can actually strike for longer, whereas before maybe they needed to strike a deal within 2 months. Now there is no limit because everyone has a basic income. So it could really be valuable to strengthening and regrowing unions in this time when unions are losing power. So
Hmm.
if unions can come to see it that way and then communicate that to their representatives, then those representatives are going to
Yes.
be much more likely to say, oh, wow, okay, this is an important idea, and I'm going to get behind it because, of course, you are behind it, and I
Hmm.
value your support. So yeah, it's about politicians coming to understand that they will gain or lose their jobs based on this issue. There are other
Right.
issues that are big issues, and this is and will be one of those that are growing in importance. And when they realize that, that's when the stuff happens.
Awesome. You know what? And I can see that actually being done. That's a great idea because as I mentioned before, I am an advocate of UBI as well. And I thought, well, how exactly can you get something like that done? And one of the, or why? If somebody were to ask me that didn't know, and one of the thoughts I had was saying that as we progress, as our technology progresses beyond labor, where the humans don't have to do the labor, as I've read in some of your articles, I'm thinking that those companies should proportionately pay an amount of their profits that they got from automation. What are your thoughts on that?
Um, so it's a really good discussion to have as far as what is the best way to fund a basic income in general.
Mm,
And I think that in general, first of all, we should realize that we already are funding a lot of our basic income. We just don't see it that way because it's conditional.
mm,
So again, like what we're doing is we're providing cash or non-cash benefits, and we're calling it welfare, and it's going to a specific group that's means tested. And
mm,
then also there's the rest of the population, and then they get a kind of means tested income support through tax credits, deductions, subsidies, expenditures, all this. And so we look at something like the earned income tax credit or the standard deduction, but we don't see it as like a kind of welfare, even though it is. What we're saying with
mm,
the standard
mm,
deduction is saying that you aren't taxed on any money until you reach $12,000, and then you're taxed. And so with the
mm,
UBI, you just say, look, instead of giving that deduction, instead of that subsidy, let's just make sure you have that visible like check, and you understand that you're receiving something as a floor that's guaranteed. And then everything you earn above that is taxed. So you no longer have those subsidies on top of it. You replace those subsidies with it. And when you do that, then you realize, well, if you look at all that we're doing, we're funding it UBI to a certain degree, but it's like uneven. It's not flat across the board.
Hmm.
And it can actually be very, it's oriented towards the top too. So as an example of that, we spend $1.5 trillion in tax expenditures every year, and 17% of that goes to the very top 1%. So you can see that,
Right.
we're, let's say, providing a $30,000 tax subsidy for somebody's mansion. And
Mm-hmm.
instead of like, we're not writing them a check for $30,000, we're reducing their tax bill by that amount. So let's not do that anymore. Let's say you don't get a $30,000 subsidy for buying a mansion, and instead you just get $12,000 like everybody else, and then you pay taxes like everybody else. So we could simplify the tax code, reduce all those loopholes that benefit the rich, at the same time as reforming the conditional welfare system, which is also very racist in the way that it's built and functions.
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
when we have like a like TANF as one example, it's a block grant system to the states. So the federal government
Mm-hmm.
writes a check to the states, and then the states determine how they want to spend that money on those who are poor. And so the way that it works here in like Louisiana is that for every 100 families that are living in poverty that qualify for TANF, only 4 actually are receiving it. So this is like
Oh.
when you're talking about like a net full of holes, then those
Mm-hmm.
are that's 96% filled full of holes that most of these families are falling through. And it
Wow.
also, TANF has increased the black-white child poverty gap by 15% as well. The way that works is that there's, let's say, more conditions in states that have a disproportionate number of Black Americans versus states with fewer number of Black Americans in that state. So let's say if a
Wow.
whiter state, it's a lot easier to get benefits and there's fewer conditions, and then that works better. But if you have more conditions, then people can actually be worse off by that. So I think that we also need to acknowledge that our conditional system does need to be made unconditional through this basic income as well. So that's just one way of looking at the fact that we don't need to raise as much revenue as we think we do in order to make this
Right.
possible. But yeah, there's a lot of
Interesting.
other ways to go about it too. We could do a value added tax as Andrew Yang ran on. We can do a wealth
And
tax like Warren ran on. There's a lot of different ways of going about it.
and what's the value added tax?
The value added tax that Andrew Yang ran on is something that works very well. It's something that we, as we're the only OECD nation that doesn't use one. This is very successful around the world. It funds, universal healthcare systems. It funds, progressive systems all across the world, even the Nordic nations. But what
Mm-hmm.
it is, it's like a sales tax, but it's actually on every transaction in the supply chain. Um, and the way that is different than a sales tax is because it's on each step along the way, then each step is kind of policing the previous step to make sure that they pay it.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that works is that kind of removes the holes in the ability to avoid paying this tax. It's a very effective revenue raiser, and that's why
Right.
it's used in so many other countries. So we could do that here in the US too, since we don't have one. We just do a 10% tax, and bam, you could fund a basic income through that.
Right. And then I like what you're saying, earlier about how it's like, wait, we already have the money is already there. Instead of it coming to us, it's basically going back to the rich in a way. It sounds like that. Look, we could do this. And while we're there and talking about, how other countries, or throughout the world that have done it, I wanted to ask you about that because I've heard that it actually is really successful either, in communities or, other countries that have attempted to try it or are doing it.
Mhm.
Is that true? And, what are some of the best examples of it? And why do you think, it absolutely works?
Yeah, so anyone listening to this, I recommend going to my Twitter account. I keep like a pinned tweet thread there where I just make a point of posting like each bit of new evidence as it comes in too. And so there's
Awesome.
a lot of evidence behind it. But just as a short summary, like there's no
Hmm.
country that has actually implemented this. You know, there's been
That's
countries that
true.
have tested it. In fact,
Hmm.
the U.S. Would have been the first country to implement it, and we were actually the first country to test a variant of it called, the negative income tax. This is so
Hmm.
Nixon was actually he proposed a guaranteed income back in '69, and it
Hmm.
passed the House of Representatives twice, once in '70 and once in '71. And in fact, in
Hmm.
1971, it was HR1. So it was like the bill, the first bill in the next session, because it was
Hmm.
that considered that important. But it didn't make it through the Senate each time. But we were close, and we experimented across the country. So we experimented in New Jersey, in Gary, Indiana. We experimented in Seattle and Denver. We, this was multi-year experiments looking at like different amounts of different amounts of the income and different amounts of clawback for the negative income tax. And so we were close, and we did learn things, from that. So in America, we were fixated most on the work impacts, and we found that there was a slight reduction in primary earning households, but it wasn't from people choosing to work less. What they did is actually you were looking at the full year, and what they did is people between jobs spent more time looking for the next job. And it's easy to argue that that is actually a good thing. We want people to be able to
Yes.
do that. It even shows that they have bargaining power. They're out there looking for what's the job that will pay me what I want to earn based on the skills that I have, and what's the job that actually utilizes my skills instead of just a job that I have to take because I have to, because I have no other choice. And so that's,
Hmm.
arguably a good thing. We also saw that there was reductions in work for mothers of newborns, and so basically that was being utilized as paid maternity leave. And so again, that's arguably a good thing too. That's not them working
Absolutely.
less; it's us valuing important unpaid work. And then also
Yes.
kids in high school, what they did is they stopped working in the labor market and they went back to school. So they finished high school if they had dropped out, they went to
Yeah.
college. And whereas before, let's say they had to help their families earn income, so then they had to
Hmm.
go and work instead of going to school. So again, that shows
Yeah.
that even though they're working less, it's an investment in ourselves and future earnings and like that. So those were just some initial things from that initial trial phase in the 70s, but we've learned a lot more since then. I would say
Hmm.
also that Alaska is the closest thing in the world to a functioning long-term basic income system. So this is since
Hmm.
1982, every resident of Alaska has received a dividend for about $1,000 to $2,000 on average every year. And that is, regardless of work, it's rich or poor, it's actually even child or adult, is the same amount for everybody in
Oh,
Alaska.
cool.
And the effects of that has been a few things. So we've seen that when it comes to one of the what I think is one of the biggest effects is that children are born with healthier weights. So that's due to better maternal nutrition. So if mothers actually have enough,
Oh,
food, then they're able to
yeah.
eat better, and the children are born healthier, and then that has lifelong repercussions. We see that if you're born underweight, it's more likely that you're going to have more health problems throughout life, and you're also less likely to, or more likely to earn less money as well. So this is it's something that's really important to make sure that kids are have healthy, womb environments, and that's what we've seen that
Yeah.
the dividend helps with. And also from Alaska as well, part-time employment has increased 17%. One study showed, and it looked at full-time employment too, and there was no impact there. There was a neutral effect. So what I mean by neutral is that some people may have chosen to work a little bit less for whatever reasons, but then at the same time, people had more money to spend, which they spent, which created more demand and more jobs, which enabled more people to get those jobs who wouldn't have either
Yeah.
been get otherwise. So that kind of evened out. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting effects, and I guess among all the many I could list, I would also list that we've seen decreases in crime. That's been seen in Alaska. It actually, the crime rate for property drops for the next couple months after the dividend goes out in Alaska. And in the Namibia UBI pilot, crime actually dropped by 42%, which I think, that's amazing. Health outcomes have also been shown to improve. So the town of Dowthan in Manitoba in the 70s, it was basically a citywide basic income guarantee and essentially limited poverty for 5 years. The result of that was that hospitalization rates decreased by 8.5%. So we can see that, if we're looking at healthcare, a lot of healthcare, 80 to 90%, depends on what's called the social determinants of health. It's not actually medical care that determines, people's health outcomes. It's really, your environment, if you're getting food, food security, stress levels, that kind of thing. So if we make sure that people have economic security and then they can actually afford what they need and they're living less stressed lives and they're even, spending more time with friends and family, they're enjoying life more, they're going to need less medical assistance, in which case you can look at UBI as a social vaccine. It's about, actually avoiding all these more expensive downstream effects by making sure that people actually that we invest in people upstream so that we don't have those issues. And also another big effect that I see over and over again is entrepreneurship. And this is in the Namibia experiment, self-employment quadrupled, and in the India UBI experiment, entrepreneurship tripled. And so you see that a lot of people want to be their own boss. They want to start their own business, but maybe they lack the capital. And maybe if they have a good idea and they start up a business, there's going to be no customers because nobody has any money. So UBI is both capital and customers, which really enables entrepreneurship in a way that you just don't see otherwise.
Wow, so it really sounds like a no-brainer, honestly. And a lot of stuff that I hear from people that disagree with UBI, or I don't, or at least just like dismiss it out of hand. They'll say stuff like, "Well, our capitalist system is the one that strikes into innovativeness, entrepreneurship, so on and so forth." But what you're saying right here completely makes sense, that it will actually, and it has proven to do so, to have more innovation as a result. Yeah. Also too, I was just thinking about the other day when I was at drive-through getting food, and the lady that helped me out, she's pregnant with a mask. I'm thinking, right in the middle of a pandemic, she has to work at a fast food restaurant making probably $10 or whatever it is. Right. That's terrible. There should be no reason for that. So, like you're saying, hey, if we had this, if we had the UBI in place, then, because, she'll be able to take care of the kid at home. There's no reason why she should be there, is what I'm saying. And there's millions of others like that.
Yeah, and the fact too that when people are actually coerced into the labor market when they would prefer not to be, we can, at the one hand, we blame them. Oh, they're lazy if they're not choosing to work. But but the other hand too, it's like that affects wages. So it should be it's up to it's the onus of the employer to actually make the work attractive. You shouldn't be able to get people to do your jobs because you're offering poverty wages. People should actually be able to refuse that. And the more people who can refuse that pushes up on wages. And that means that someone who, is, let's say, I'm worried about someone not working because I am. And it's like, well, if they choose not to work, then I'm doing work that's more valuable. And so I can actually see an increase in pay because of them not working. So it's a lot of what we're seeing in the labor market is because people lack that bargaining power.
Right. And you're debunking right now, just by saying what you're saying, you're debunking a lot of myths out there that are used as a scare tactic, against UBI and even other, other socialist programs. So,
No, it's just, it really does come down to power. And I would argue that that's why we don't already have it. In fact, if you go back to the Senate not passing the guaranteed income under Nixon, Russell Long was the chair of the Senate Finance Committee. And he was worried, and this was a quote too, that who will press my shirts? And so he was concerned too that if people
ridiculous.
had that guaranteed income, then he
Yeah.
would not be able to get people to do what he wanted to for cheap. And there's also an element of racism in there too. He was from, he was
Yeah.
a Southern Louisiana, Democrat actually, but his concern was also that African Americans would be able to refuse to iron his shirts. It wasn't only about anybody in general, but like he
Mm.
was, there's a lot of racism in this lack of power among people. Um, we have to actually provide that power. We have to guarantee that, and I think
Yeah.
that the fact that we have refused to do that is a big part of all these problems that still exist today.
Right, man. That's so mind blowing to me to think of how pervasive racism is in this country in the basic systems. I mean, we can go on about that, but I'll switch away from that just really quick.
Yeah.
As we're getting closer to running out of time here, I read in HuffPost your article there where you titled it "Stop Teaching Students What to Think,
Mhm.
Teach Them How to Think," mentioning how education must be reoriented accordingly. So I'm going to just say two quotes from there,
Mhm.
and want to get your thoughts or just further elaboration if that's cool with
Mhm.
you.
Yeah.
So one thing that really stuck out, you mentioned there, memorization of facts is pointless in a world where everyone carries around the entire knowledge base of the human species on their person.
Yeah.
Love that. Speak more to that.
Yeah. I mean, we're in this environment where there's just no point in memorizing things anymore. The problem is not that we aren't able to find what we need to find. The problem is that there is just a massive amount of stuff out there to find. And like I would argue that this is what we're seeing too with QAnon. And so people who are believing in like this QAnon stuff, then they consider it research. They're finding, they're researching, they're independently researching, they're going down their rabbit holes, and when
Right.
you're looking for something, you can find it. And so
Right.
the trick now is to actually help people to ask the right questions and to determine what is information that's actually valid and not valid. Everyone needs to be able to have a strong understanding of the scientific method and how to be able
Yes.
to like Carl Sagan, he put together what he called the baloney detection kit. And we need to be able to detect baloney, and that's something that should be really taught in schools, so that it's not that
Hmm.
you're memorizing stuff, because again, that's not the issue. You have to be able
Right.
to find stuff and figure out what it is, the stuff that you should be installing in your brain, and the stuff
Hmm.
that you should be saying, no, that's bad, that doesn't make any sense, that's a lie, that's false, it's nonsense. And you'd be able to separate that out. So yeah, so critical thinking is of utter importance right now. And aside from critical thinking, like
Completely
you
agree.
have to teach curiosity too. This is something that I think schools traditionally are pretty bad at, where they're teaching answers. So
Hmm.
you're taught that there was this question, and then someone solved it, and now here's the answer. And so you kind of come out of
Hmm.
school thinking like, what is there to do? Everything's been solved.
Right.
Instead of like teaching these questions and teaching what it is that we don't know. And, we know this, but because of knowing this, now there's this that we don't know. And this is really interesting because we don't know it. And then you can start to teach questions, and then there's kind of a celebration of what we don't know. And I think there's almost a concern in society and teaching, that if we teach people that there's stuff that are question marks, then that's somehow like a bad thing. But I think we need to be, like, as a society, much more comfortable and embrace those question marks, because that's what makes things really interesting, is that there are all these question marks, there are all these things that we don't know, and that we can actually
Mm.
pursue them and use the scientific method to actually learn more about the way the world works, and determine our own lives in our own paths, to find our own like exploration of what life is. It's kind of, we need to focus more on that open-ended kind of thing, because again, too, this way that we've been teaching is oriented a lot better around the old ways of working, when, you know, you did clock into a factory, and, you know, it made a lot of sense for, you know, following this 8 hour, you know, day, and, you know, doing like one thing over and over and over again. You're not really like engaging like your whole mind and everything. Um, as we go into the future, and technology is able to do more and more stuff, it's able to do all of those things that are repetitive. And it's even able to do things that is not repetitive through AI. And so what technology can't do is the stuff that humans are best suited to doing. And that's what we should be embracing. And that's the creative mind of humanity, and it's our collaboration abilities. So again, you know, those are key components too, is that in school we should be teaching creativity, and we should be teaching collaboration, like how it is that you can work together to use these tools to actually create more together that you couldn't do otherwise. And
Right.
I'd also say that in order for education to even work, is that you need like solid home environments. You know, your parents, you do better as a student if your parents are experiencing less stress. You know, if your parents have you know, there's less fighting between them. There's more time to work with kids, so that there's more adult parent or more parent child interactions at the home, because the parent is working, you know, 30 to 40 hours a week and has a basic income, instead of working 60 to 70 hours a week without a basic income, and they have no time whatsoever. And so it's just, you can't have the interaction, and the kid goes to school. If the kid doesn't, if he's not getting enough food, then, you know, how do you focus on education? And so it's also, there's that interaction between economic security and education, where if you make sure that every child is not living in poverty, and they are instead living in these secure home environments, then all the money that we're putting into school would actually lead to better outcomes, and kids coming out of the system better educated. And if we improve the system so that we're actually teaching kids curiosity and critical thinking and all these other things that we should be teaching them, then they're much more set up for the actual world that we're living in right now, and this future world that we don't know what's going to be like. We just know that it's coming.
Right. Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that right there at the end, because that actually ties in with the other part that stuck out to me, where you mentioned the unconditional basic income, and this is the quote there, saying that a cash stipend starting everyone above the poverty line each month needs to be a key characteristic of the UBI, needs to be a key characteristic of the future of work. That way, as paid work is automated, humans can focus more on all the work that needs to be done in the ways that most engage in them. So you were touching on it a little bit right there, you know, but with that, you know, where were you going with that thought?
Yeah, so that speaks to worker engagement, and I think also to intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, which are, and those things are tied together. So there's a survey that showed that worldwide, only 15% of people who are employed are engaged by the work that they're doing. In the US, it's
Oh,
30%
wow.
right now. It was actually higher, and it's gone down just recently through the crisis. And so, yeah, most people are not engaged by the work that they're doing. And the question is, of course, well, you know, why? And so a lot of this is why you're supposed to be engaged in something where all you're doing it for is a paycheck. You know,
Right.
some people are very fortunate that they're able to have jobs that they really enjoy, that they derive some meaning from it. But they're in the minority. The majority of people are just treating it as a paycheck. They're not interested. What's interesting too is there's psychological studies that show, by just introducing the option to refuse in a task, then you increase engagement in the task. Just as a
Interesting.
quick survey of that, of one of these experiments, is that you leave some people in a room, and you say, do this task or do this task, and then we'll come back and check on you later. And they work on it on average, it was 5 minutes. And then you do another group, and you do, okay, this task or this task, same tasks, or you can just sit in the room and do nothing if you want, and then we'll come back later. So that group with the option to do nothing actually spent 7 minutes on average per task instead of 5. And so the only difference was that they were allowed the option to not do it. So I think that's part of the problem too, is that by, again, not providing people the option to refuse to work in this kind of distrust and belief that people won't do anything, then you actually decrease the incentive to do this because they feel forced into it. They're not interested. And so if you enable people that, and you actually enable people with this floor and this, boots to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but then you can choose the work that you want to do. You can start your own business. You can, become an artist. You can pursue unpaid work. You can actually do unpaid care work. You can do volunteering in your community. These kinds of forms of work that are entirely unpaid, and the only way you're able to do them is if you can afford to do them through some other way. So if we actually enable all of that, then I think that we could create a culture where a lot more people are engaged by what they're doing. And when people are a lot more engaged by what they're doing, I also argue the quality improves. Like imagine who's going to make a better sandwich for you? Is the better sandwich going to be made by if you hold a gun to someone's head and say, make me a sandwich? Or is it going to be the person who believes that he is the sandwich master and can create the best sandwich in the world and wants to show off that he has the ability to possibly, bring you to climax with his sandwich. So what's the better option? So enable people to pursue, enable people to pursue what it is that their emotion are pursuing, and you're going to see a lot more amazing stuff out there.
You bring up such great points on that. To go back now to when you were mentioning about the thoughts and for us to think critically, I do have a question on this. I want to see what you think about it. Sure. Does the blind faith teachings of religion also add to that, which what you were saying, of the fact that we just we kind of believe what we're told and we think the answers are out there and everything. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that? Or is that something that you'd rather not touch?
Sorry, could you repeat that again?
Yeah, no problem. I said, I'm wondering if the blind faith teachings of religion that a lot of people get, indoctrinate or learn as they're younger, do you think that also adds to what you were saying about, us not, as we get older and we become independent, to not necessarily think critically? Or is that something that just is crazy that I just thought of while you were talking?
It's interesting to think about kind of what religion does, and I would say that there's some interesting things about it through studies of stress, where stress environment, chronic stress results in people trying to gain some kind of control over their lives. And there's a lot of ways of gaining control over your life or feeling that you're gaining control. So some of those ways are worse than others. Like they can be bullying behavior, xenophobia, this kind of hierarchical push someone down so that you feel lifted up, that you have control. When it comes to religion, that you feel that you have the answers. That's kind of like with QAnon too, is you feel that you've discovered something that makes sense and is true, and you're the one who gets it, other people don't. When it comes to religion, it's the same thing, where you feel that God exists, God offers you some kind of control. If you pray to God, it'll help. And so there's that element. And I think that when it comes to unconditional security, that can actually aid in a way of people not looking for various reasons to claim control over their lives. But also it's that religion really helps with community. And, a lot of it, the value of is going to church and having those social bonds. And so again, a basic income also helps with making sure that people can engage in those. So they can engage in community via churches, but also they can engage more with their families and friends and, communities in general. So I guess that's what I would say about that.
Okay, great. So yeah, so it all ties in with, with the ability to of community and
Yeah.
togetherness and having more of a robust social and economic thing. So look, unfortunately, we just ran out of time. I mean, I would obviously have so much more to say. You
Yeah.
mentioned ending gerrymandering. Getting away from GDP. If you had a second, I would like to get the answer to that, getting away from GDP. But maybe we'll have to fix that for next time.
Yeah,
Unless
we'll
there's
do it
something,
next time.
really quick that you'd like to say about that.
No, I would just say that
Uh,
we.
okay, yeah, and it's breaking up right now.
Okay, I would just say that
You're back.
we
You're back.
that it is important to look at what is the purpose of all this. Is the purpose earning money and just more money and spending that money?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what life is all about? Well, no. And whatever this economy that we've created, the economy should work for us. It should be about human well-being and human flourishing. And so GDP is not about that. GDP is just looking at the value creation based on what we consider to be valuable based on what we're paying for it. Like GDP doesn't include the unpaid care work going on. It doesn't include all kinds of things, and it only looks at the economics aspect. But we should look beyond that and actually try to create a society that is about well-being instead of just these like stock market or GDP or anything.
Excellent. That's perfect. And probably a great way to wrap that up. So Scott Santens, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. How can people get a hold of you or check out more of your work? Where can they go?
Yeah, you can find my UBI FAQ at scottsantens.com. And yeah, also head to my Twitter and check out my pinned tweet thread.
Awesome. It's been a huge pleasure, Scott. Thank you so much then.
Thank you. Take care.
Have a good one. You as well. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please tap the like, hit the bell, subscribe to us, and support us on Patreon if you want to join the cause to help us get corrupt bribes out of our nation's news media. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, this is your revolution.